I'll be finding my art style through experimenting with 2 watercolor paintings. Honestly, I find it fascinating how art has evolved over the centuries. It all begins with cave paintings in the prehistoric era, estimated about 40,000 to 4,000 BCE, which becomes more realistic and detailed as we enter the Renaissance. You start to see breaks out of traditional realism with the Art Nouveau era from 1890 to 1910, which translates to new art, followed by Impressionism, which artwork strives to capture a moment in time. Then you have Fauvism from 1900 to 1935, which was expressive with color and brushstrokes, and Expressionism, which created new standards by which art was judged, having art mean to be an expression of the artist as opposed to simply being an accurate depiction. Then, after a bunch of other eras, we end up in the contemporary art era, which is where we are today. I'm painting this portrait freehand with watercolor, trying to be more expressive in my strokes, and soon enough you'll see I'll be doing something pretty interesting with the hair, something I haven't done before. I only started taking art seriously about a year ago, and over this journey I'm striving to develop myself as an artist and my unique voice within my paintings. A lot of well-known artists have a distinct art style, which is, as we saw before, a way of a style in which they make their drawings that is unique to them. And an artist can be developing their art style over the course of many, many years. And your art style will always be changing and evolving as you move and improve with your art. However, as a new artist myself, I can't say that I have found a distinct style in which I like to create, and that really speaks to me. So these 2 portraits are a embarkment onto this journey of actively finding my art style. As you can see right now, I'm adding more red into the painting. I'm trying to balance the amount of blue. After we finish up with the hair, you'll see me totally throw caution to the winds and invent the second eye. In my reference photo, the second eye is cut out, so we'll be attempting to paint in the second eye without any reference photo at all, completely from my imagination. This painting is actually my second biggest watercolor portrait, and as opposed to my first portrait, I am painting this one with really free brush strokes, using a thick brush and kind of diving in and going more spontaneous. With my first portrait, which I have a video of, I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested. I painted it using a more careful smoothing out method, which took me months, and honestly, painting so free really gave me joy. I felt this sort of focus and determination to just express myself. I could flick my wrist if I felt like it and create these cool brush strokes, which were really interesting, and it felt very freeing. The main challenge right now is not to overdo it and get the portrait to a point where it looks realistic enough to not be cartoony, but at the same time not hyper realistic. Pursuing your art style takes a lot of experimentation. You end up going out of your comfort zone in search of something new and something that will resonate with you. However, if you're anything like me, sometimes you find it a little challenging to force yourself out of your comfort zone and experiment with your art, especially because you don't want to lose your art piece. You want it to end up all right, and by experimenting, you're really throwing your painting, to the winds. You have no idea how it's going to turn out. It could be really good or it could be really bad. I really struggled with painting this eye. I found it challenging since I was drawing it from my imagination, to make it look like the face wasn't lopsided, to get the proportions right, which was really hard. I would draw in the blob where the eye would be, the general area, and then I'd stand back and kind of squint my eyes at it, look at it from the side, study it, see if it was in the right spot, and when I was satisfied, that's when I went in with the thin brush and started outlining the eye and the iris. And now I'm starting on the second watercolor painting, and this painting is going to be super interesting. We'll be soon attempting to paint with bubbles. Where the first painting went more or less smoothly, this one didn't at all. Right now I'm going in and mapping out the darkest areas, and when you're not using a sketch, this stage of the process is very essential to get right, because the shadows are really what is making your face a face, right? You don't have any lines, or you're just working with shapes. And with this portrait, it was going a bit wrong. There was a bunch of, trial and error, erasing with the water, trying to fix it, but we sort of got there in the end. I hate it. It looks so bad.
A few moments later.
I was given this idea by my mentor in pottery class. I'm taking a bit of watercolor, some dish soap, water, and I'm blowing into it, trying to create bubbles and hoping that when I put the bubbles on the paper, it'll leave these cool bubble designs. It was a challenge to get the bubbles to form in the first place. Kind of. And the bubbles on the paper were not holding their form at all. It was just turning into blobs. A couple of days after that huge disappointment, I started again, this time with a lot more dish soap, and instead of watercolors, I'm gonna try using acrylic paint. And this worked with flying colors. However, now the question is, how do you get the bubbles onto the paper without potentially ruining your piece? I tested a bunch of different ways and found that simply dabbing your paper into the mountain of bubbles that you made is the best bet.
It appears that it's working.
Originally, I wanted the bubbles to be like the hair of the girl. However, with bubble painting, it's, unpredictable, and I ended up putting bubbles a little more out of bounds than I originally intended. So I'm going in and painting lightly where the hair ends. I felt a little nervous at this point because the painting process was going totally unexpectedly. As you can see, I was trying to paint in the eye, but it was getting so creepy and then my proportions started going off. So I was kind of internally panicking, but at this point, at the same time, I just was like, I'm done. Let's just figure this out, and leave it alone for a bit. I decided to add the bubbles all the way around the painting, and you'll soon see how I start carving the hair. A lot of times when you're starting to feel overwhelmed and frustrated throughout the painting process, I really recommend to just drop everything and take a break. It really, really helps because, number one, it keeps you from ruining your artwork entirely because you're just adding and, your emotions are getting in the way of just reason. And when you take some time off your piece, you kind of gain clarity and you start to gain new ideas of, how to problem solve. You can see me going in with these carving designs, and it's similar to what I usually do with my pottery. Something that I'm starting to appreciate more and more is finishing what you started. Even if the process isn't going necessarily as you expect, you learn, and the process teaches you to work past difficulties. Personally, in my experience, I found that even if you don't like what you're making at the moment, if you keep hacking away at it and don't give up on it, a lot of times it ends up getting better. I personally find that I become more free and risky in what I make, and that leads to some really cool choices I wouldn't have made otherwise, and that potentially adds a lot to the final piece. And sometimes you end up liking it, sometimes you end up not, but in the end, I don't think you'll regret finishing a piece. Going out of your comfort zone and trying something new can be challenging, especially when you're not sure whether or not you'll succeed. And finding your art style is no exception. Despite telling myself for weeks and weeks to give this new approach to painting a try and to give bubble art a go, I found myself just putting it off and stalling. Later, as I was walking along the beach, I suddenly remembered the quote, "Fortune favors the bold." And it got me thinking, what does it mean to be bold? Is it about confronting and overcoming big things? Is it simply about taking a huge risk that could make or break you? I think the small, bold things we do every day are important as well, if not more so. I think our strength lies in our choices, in choosing to do something we know will be good for us, even if it's not easy, and it doesn't come naturally. Failing is unpleasant. However, it's only through facing the possibility of failure that we can actually succeed. How can you become good at painting if you avoid picking up the paintbrush? Sometimes you gotta be bold and push past your doubt in order to unlock your fortune.